What's going on, everybody? This is Chris K from Burning the Red Shirt here with Andrew P. Katz, and we're doing a little bit of a fun couple segments. I shouldn't say couple. We're doing,
10.
I guess, 10? 10 segments leading up into the season with under 100 days until football is back. So we are going to do some conference previews, and we figured we bring Brandon Champion along to be our guinea pig, our resident Michigan State fan and source of truth, as well as Big Ten knowledgeable guy as well. So, Brandon, appreciate you being the guinea pig and hopping on and having some fun with us tonight.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate the invite. I feel like I'm like the high A pitcher who gets like called all the way up to the majors, like be on a pod with you guys because you're like, two of the people I go to for CFF information. We contribute, we compete against each other, obviously, but I consider myself still somewhat of a rookie. So an honor to be on with you fellas.
Dude, you're that Braves pitcher with the weird name that got called up tonight.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah.
AJ Smith Solver, but I think he's actually good. He's actually really good. Yeah. I don't know if he's going to start, but he's really good.
Yeah, I'm like the guy that the Tigers GM Scott Harris, he loves to sign like these random guys with 5 ERAs to like entry-level contracts. And I'm just like, I hope he knows what he's doing, so hope you guys know what you're doing.
Yeah, awesome. I guess, talking Big Ten, I don't know if you caught the news last week, Brandon, but there was some big scheduling situation things going on. Did you see that Michigan State's going to be playing Penn State at Ford Field?
I had a couple thoughts out there on the Bird app. Yeah. I'm a season ticket holder. I wasn't a huge fan of the news. I'm somewhat of a traditionalist. I like to see my regular season college football played in college football stadiums. So I wasn't a huge fan of the move, especially giving up one of our bigger, home games. And, people like to crap on the Michigan State, Penn State, rivalry, so to speak. But, I happen to think that the Land Grant Trophy is the most beautiful trophy in college football. So I was a little sad to see it move out. But I guess after thinking about it, talking to people, I get it. They're going to have their own Friday window there. It has to do with boring TV stuff, but I don't think we really need to get into the weeds why they actually did it. But
I was going to bring this up if Chris didn't direct the conversation.
You knew it was coming one way or the other.
We had a mind meld there, but dude, you don't need to professionalize it or try and be objective or anything like that. Like I feel you, and I don't know if you got any pushback from fans of other teams, but how do you think people would react if the whiteout game on CBS for Penn State, Iowa was moved to fucking Chicago or some shit? How would Penn State fans feel about that? Or what if the game was moved to like Indianapolis or some shit, right? I mean, anyone who's pushing back on your opinion that one of it would have been 4, now it's 3 home Big Ten games that Michigan State hosts year to year is not a big deal for you. Like, that's a huge deal. It sucks as a fan, right? Losing one of those. So I think you're totally in the right to have the sentiment that you have.
It's such a competitive advantage for any home team, like a Michigan State versus a Penn State. And I think most people would agree that Michigan State this year needs as much of an advantage. They're not as good as years past, but and Penn State's kind of definitely trending towards like the very upper piece of the Big Ten. And it sucks, like as a Virginia Tech fan, like the home games can be brutal. So you look forward to those big games against maybe like Miami or Clemson or something, and then they just take it right away from you. So Andrew and I, there's moments in Twitter life where we're like, oh, dude, you got to look at this. Like, this is happening. Just watch this live. And this was one of those moments. But I mean, you were super passionate, but that's college football and college football fans in general. And for the most part, you weren't wrong at all. And I think anybody that's a college football fan, like super passionate, totally gets it for sure.
Yeah. I think us diehards understand, that, the pageantry of college football, a lot of it is about the atmosphere in the home stadiums. And, 2 years ago, you guys might remember Michigan State, Penn State played in that huge blizzard. And it made for one of the more memorable games that I've ever been to, just because of the weather. So if people want to point to, what if Michigan State's, 4-6 and they're hosting Penn State at night at Spartan Stadium in the middle of a snowstorm? What's the crowd going to look like? I guess as a one-off in Detroit, it's okay, but I definitely don't want to see this become the norm. That's for sure.
A theme for sure. So, all right. So we want to talk Big Ten. Obviously, we have a general idea of going over the conferences and then going over individual teams that we don't necessarily harp on too much. But I guess, Brandon, going into like the CFF landscape of the whole Big Ten, is there one battle or player or offense that like jumps out to you as like, this is the most interesting thing to me to follow going into week 0 or week 1?
Well, I have a question for you when it comes to the Big Ten, but I'll throw it back at you in a sec here. To answer your question, I think Penn State is really interesting. I mean, I'm kind of a Drew Aller believer. I've got him on I think the Dynasty League, that in your guys' BTR Dynasty League, I think I took him. So I'm hoping that he turns into something. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be like this elite quarterback from fantasy standpoint year 1, but he should be in the system for a few years. And I guess I'm just curious to see if that offensive line is going to hold up for him, if he's going to have enough time to actually make plays, because I also really like Dante Cephas going over there. So those are the kind of to see like if Penn State is actually going to have like that game breaking receiver that we've seen them have in the past, John Dotson, like guys like that. I don't know, because I feel like they're going to need it if they want to actually, take the next step and beat Michigan and Ohio State, because Penn State's been a very good program for a long time, but I feel like nationally people are like, yeah, but they don't do this, so they kind of disrespect them a little bit. So I think they finally have, like that 5-star talent in multiple positions, and it's going to be fun to watch. So I'm kind of watching that one early on. I think they play West Virginia week 1 too, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's a good matchup for sure to start with. I agree. I think it's a nice early matchup, but I think just generally speaking from a CFF landscape, they feel like if you were to reverse the question, if I was to reverse it towards myself, like I think Ohio State to me is super interesting because we don't know necessarily what we're getting out of McCord. They have studs across the board. So like to me, Penn State feels like an Ohio State light, like 2 great running backs, very capable receiving core. So, and then an unproven but promising quarterback. So I think those are all super interesting. Andrew, any thoughts there, or maybe a similar, or maybe the question posed to you?
I've drafted a little bit of OR in best ball so far. I feel like I saw somewhere that there's the idea that he could, like he's a big body dude who might run it a little bit too. Everyone kind of talks about the arm, but that would be interesting, I think, when you think about his fantasy profile. I think largely because I won some money betting his props last year. Like I want KLS to be a thing, Keandre Lambert-Smith. Mm-hmm. Penn State fans don't necessarily seem to be overly hopeful that it's going to actually happen. But I don't know. I feel like he stepped up a little bit and flashed down stretch last year, and I read a couple things this spring that made me think that he's going to have every opportunity to step up and kind of be the dude there. WR1 in that offense gets a lot of targets, so he's largely free. So I've been kind of cool taking shots there. And then I've drafted Nicholas Singleton just mainly because he's cool and he's awesome. And in best ball, you're going to get some insane weeks, but you can get Katron Allen in like round 16 too. So
yeah, I don't get the gap between those two because they were basically working in tandem last year.
Yeah, it's just paying a tax for Singleton being super cool. I was thinking about my next best ball draft, and I wrote in pencil that I want to try and get Allen on that team, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, you'll have to battle me. I have a ton of Katron Allen because I think, Brandon, you make a great point. Like, what's the difference between Mayan and Travion? Why is that gap closer than Katron and Singleton? And I think, honestly, the Mayan one should probably be like a little bit closer in the gap, because it's right now, I would say Singleton and Travion are both like 3rd rounders. You might see a guy take them in the 2nd. They might fall to 4th, but typically around the 3rd round, they're gone. And then Mayan seems to be like a 9 to 12 rounder, whereas Katron's like a 12 to 15 rounder to me. And sometimes I feel like it might be worse than that because I end up taking them. It just feels like such a good, safe pick. So I love those options deeper into the best balls.
Well, like I mean, just like look at their production last year, man. I know you don't want a ton of stats, but what was the carry difference? Wasn't that different? I mean, what, 156 to 167? Katron actually had more carries than Singleton last year. I mean, what? Is that true?
It's, Katron started, I feel like, for a while. And then, because I would always like panic, you use Singleton and they're like, oh shit, Katron started. And then it ends up being fine because they're just both super effective and efficient with touches. I mean, obviously, Andrew's pointed out the Singleton love is one, because he's super cool. He came out of high school as like a huge prospect, like a no doubter in terms of guys that can be productive year one. But didn't he have that like insane Rose Bowl? And like you see that happen all the time with like Smith and Jigba. That Rose Bowl pushed him to like insane levels of potential as well in the next season. So, is there a battle that you're interested in, like a QB, running back, receiver battle that you think is legitimate and is interesting to you, Brandon?
I don't know. Does Corum and Edwards count as a battle? Like, I don't know. Like,
I think it's fair.
Does it count as a battle? Because I've heard, obviously I'm here in Michigan. You're a Michigan fan. I've heard, that Corum came back to Michigan for one reason, and that's to win a national championship. And, because they worked him a lot last year. I mean, he was getting a lot of carries, and obviously it ended up getting hurt. I've heard Corum came back to be part of a team and win a natty, and that honestly Donovan Edwards could end up with either an equal share of carries or maybe even more in certain games, like when they don't need Corum. So I know they're both being drafted pretty high, but is there a legitimate chance that Edwards should actually be being drafted higher than Corum? I guess is my question.
Andrew, what's kind of your vibe as a unbiased outside perspective?
I was targeting Corum for a little bit just because I wanted a rock in the form of a running back from which to build my best ball teams, and it felt like nice high floor. Even if he doesn't get the share of carries that he had last year, like the pie's going to be so large, line should still be amazing. You figure Edwards touches in the games where they're both healthy tick up, but
the schedule too. The schedule is very manageable, especially that non-con. But I mean, that you think about that stuff. I mean, I'm not here to rip on it. I am. But like, but I mean, that's why I'm like, I draft Michigan defense everywhere because I know for those first 3-4 games, they're going to be putting up huge points. So it's just like the schedule is just pretty manageable, I think. And Michigan's gonna be really heavy on the run, so I'm not sure it really matters, but. They're both being drafted like pretty early on, right? I don't know ADP like you. I've only done one best ball.
I think that if we lived in a world where we were talking about large form best ball tourneys like underdog hosts for NFL and stuff, then you can get more into the arguments of drafting Edwards over Corum. But just in like standard 12-team best ball, whatever standard league, I don't think like I understand the arguments for why it could play out the way it is, but I'm just going to go Corum every time and even take him. Like I'm cool taking him multiple rounds ahead just because it feels super safe with also a nice, very nice ceiling as we saw evidence by last year.
Yeah, I think Corum is like basically an early second rounder ish, and Edwards is maybe 4th round ish.
Okay, so he's going pretty high.
Dude, it's wild.
Yeah. And I think JD Yankee made a great point on one of those Campus to Canton podcasts I actually listened to this week, and which I never do. And he said, "Hey, I have Corum at number 3. Do I think he finishes number 3? No, probably not. But like, I can pretty much guarantee he's going to finish top 10 or top 12." And Andrew, you kind of alluded to, like, you kind of mentioned that earlier. Like, I know what I'm getting out of it, and really, the range of outcomes is 3 to 12 for Corum. For Edwards, I mean, if you're taking him in the, let's say, the early 4th, like maybe that's RB 12. His range of outcomes is running back 3 to running back 35, 40, right? It's a deep position. And I don't know, maybe you guys can help me out here. Like, what's the difference between this offseason and the last? Because last offseason, a lot of people were on Edwards. Their skill was still there. You know, what was Edwards doing up until Corum got hurt? He didn't really produce a ton. You probably hated drafting him if at where you took him before the injury, right?
Was it the Maryland game that he just went off? He had like 4 or 5 super long touchdowns, Edwards, I think. So like maybe his production wasn't very like clean across the board or consistent, but he did have like these explosive pop-up plays where he was and obviously versus Ohio State he had a big game too. So I think it's just like the allure of that, like this is sort of the same thing with Singleton or Travion. It's just the allure of that, 5-star game breaker talent that people really want to have if they do pop. And I guess you could say, Corum's coming off injury, so maybe that's an excuse to bump Edwards up a little bit more this year. But like, I feel like he was going like 8th, 9th round last year. So to see him sort of get this bump up is interesting.
Yeah, they were both in like kind of that 4 to 7 round, just depending on who you're drafting with, right? Like if you're drafting with me and Mike, like he wasn't lasting to the 8th, but I think in some leagues for sure, in some drafts, he was definitely falling. Andrew, is there a quarterback receiver battle coming into this that you were thinking was super intriguing to you?
Quarterback receiver. So when we just brought up the idea of, well, is now the fair time to allow our guest to pontificate upon the topic of which he immerses himself in most deeply, Michigan State, right? All 3 of the primary positions, QB, running back, wide receiver, I feel like, okay, quarterback, it's not really a battle at this point, presumably, right? But I'm still so interested to get your perspective on this dude, Kim. And then running back and wide receiver, I have no idea what's going on there. And
Nobody
I don't know.
does.
I would love your thoughts.
I can give you an educated opinion on what the guys that I do, my podcast with talking about Michigan State, and they're the beat reporters, so they see it and kind of what they've seen. But I can't even, not even me who's pretty tuned in, I can't even come in here and give you definitive answers on what Michigan State's offense or who's going to be playing it. The answer was Keon Coleman. So that is no longer a thing. And I don't really want to go down that road. I'm a little bit sore and sour about that whole thing. But like, so as far as quarterback, I do think Kim will open the season as the starter. He's definitely shown some nice here in the spring. They don't have a spring practice or a spring game anymore, as I'm sure you guys know. It's more of like an open practice. The reason Mel gave for that this year was because they didn't have enough D linemen to have 2 teams. Last year it was they didn't have enough offensive linemen. The year before that it was they didn't have enough corners. So I'm just like, okay, Mel, whatever. You clearly just don't want to have a spring game. But and he doesn't. He's openly said that why would he do anything that gives people an advantage for what his team to see? So I wouldn't expect to get answers to these questions until they go out there Friday night against Central Michigan. But Kim did look improved in the spring game or the spring practice. He was moving around in the pocket really nicely, showing some nice movement in the pocket and then delivering throws downfield. We didn't see as much from Hauser, but then again, Peyton Thorne was still getting, it looked like top reps in that practice. So I don't know if they were hiding Hauser or whatever, but I do think Kim will start. Hauser has the higher upside in my opinion. And I think he is more of the long-term answer, but with all these positions, we don't really know. With running back, I'm on the Nathan Carter train, the transfer from UConn. He is, I don't know if you guys have seen pictures of this guy, but he is just absolutely jacked, just like arms as big as my torso. And he has some big playability. So I think that, we saw Berger last year. He was okay, but really folded. I mean, the running game in general was kind of irrelevant. And I'm not sure that the running game is going to be that much better this year. They do have 2 veterans on the offensive line. They brought in the number 1 JUCO offensive lineman in the country in Keyshawn Blackstock. So maybe they'll be a little bit improved in running the ball, but I don't know if either of them are going to be fantasy relevant, but I would go Carter over Berger. And then at receiver, Trey Mosley and Montori Foster are going to be your 2 veterans that come back. I don't know if they're going to be relevant fantasy wise. If you're looking for like sleepers for like dynasty, like I think Tyrell Henry is a guy who played on special teams last year. He might play some slot this year. He's a young guy. So, and then Christian Fitzpatrick, who transferred in from Louisville a couple years ago, is like 6'4", 200. He's really the only bigger, like throw it up and go get it receivers that they have left on the roster. And, if you saw last year, that was basically their best play was throw it up to Keon. So, I don't know if any of these guys are going to be relevant, at least in CFF redraft. If there was one guy that I saw that could be a sneaky relevant player, it might be Malik Carr, the tight end. Just, new tight end, new quarterbacks, rely on the tight end. Carr's shown big playability in the past. He's a big body with some game-breaking ability. So, maybe you get some touchdowns out of him. But overall, I'm not sure, at least early on, that Michigan State is going to be a very productive offense for fantasy, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was kind of aware of Carr. Was he the basketball player as well, or no? Did I make that up?
He was on the team for a year, but he's transferred in from Purdue. He's a former 4-star guy, transferred a couple years from Purdue over. But yeah, he did play basketball in high school and was on the team for a year. But I don't know if he might have got into one game. So that was just kind of a thing that him and Keon were doing for a little bit.
Gotcha. I like him generally speaking, like in these champion series ones that are like, or any just tight end premium type league. I think like that can get pretty thin pretty quick. And I think I've drafted him once or twice as like a dart throw at the end. Because I think like just generally speaking, it seemed like he had a lot of athleticism. Nobody else really as a target. So like new quarterback. I had a quick question about Hauser. He was a pretty decent recruit for you guys, right? And what's his style of play?
He's a high 4-star. He performed really well at the Elite 11s. Jay Johnson, their quarterback's coach, offensive coordinator, identified him pretty early. Same thing with the kid they got out of Oregon this year, Sam Levitt, who's a 4-star. Both of these guys were like high 3-stars before the Elite 11s, and they both turned into 4-stars by the end. So I don't know. Jay Johnson does have an ability to sort of get these guys before they rise and sort of blow up. So he's one of the better 4-star quarterback. I don't think they've had a higher commit in terms of 247 rating since, here's a blast from the past for you guys, Jeff Smoker. I don't know if you remember Jeff Smoker, but he is the highest quarterback recruit they've gotten since him. So, obviously they've had some good diamond in the rough there through the years, but he has some mobility, really strong arm, can make all the throws. He was the Elite 11s is where he really blew up. Fortunately, they already had him, pretty much committed because he was chucking it everywhere. So he's a strong arm kid, can make all the throws. I think he's just, in interviews, I've heard him. He seems like a really sort of thinks the game kind of guy. He's the classic sort of like laid back Cali quarterback kid, like the guy from Remember the Titans. He likes surfing. He does. He's a Cali kid with that quarterback swagger. So that's why I think long-term, he's probably more of the answer. I fear that if he doesn't get meaningful snaps this year, he might transfer out. So it's going to be on Noah Kim to prove that he's the better man for the job. He's been in the program for 4 years, but in terms of that moxie, swagger, and ultimate ceiling, Katin Hauser is that guy. He's what you want for, potentially, some dual threat production out of him. So, maybe the ceiling for the whole team would go up, and maybe in terms of fantasy production, I just don't know if he's ready yet. He's only been there for a year and a summer. So,
yeah, not to mention he doesn't have anybody to help him, right? Like out wide, he doesn't have maybe a strong run game potentially. Yeah. Carter's an interesting name though, because like obviously Kenneth Walker blew up once he got to Michigan State, but he wasn't like all world beforehand. Carter is that big bodied guy, which seems interesting for a Mel Tucker because he just might get 25 touches a game, which is always interesting for CFF. But
I don't think Jalen Berger showed anything to like prove that he needs like a workhorse role last year.
Right. Andrew, any thoughts in this same type of vein as an overarching conference debate question thought, or before we jump into maybe like any big bust thoughts or any top play type guys in the conference?
Is there a situation or a player that you're scared the most from this conference that you could fade and it could blow up in your face?
I have one. It's Talia Tagovailoa. I feel like he could just turn into a stud. He's been in the program for 3-4 years now. Yeah. I've always kind of wondered why he isn't more of a CFF stud. I guess it's because he doesn't really run. But it seems like the talent should be there. They've had weapons on the outside. I guess maybe the main issue with him is just, he's in the Big Ten East. So he's got to go, against Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. In the past, Michigan State has been something, obviously not this year or last year, but I guess maybe he goes pretty late. So maybe it's like worth taking a shot on him and I won't really actually miss out. But I don't know. I've taken him in Big Ten best balls in the past. I've taken him in best ball leagues just because I think that he has a really high ceiling, but there's something holding him back. I just wonder, in his 5th year here, maybe if I've faded him for the last time and he's going to blow up on me, but maybe not.
They've been such a gift as a program to fantasy owners in the sense that they're just so they've been so predictable. Okay, I bench them against the good teams. I play them against the bad teams.
Mhm.
The offense goes nuts again when they're non-con and against some of those Big Ten West programs. Bench them against Michigan because that it's just not going to work out. Like that's cool. What more can you really hope for from a fantasy perspective, especially when you're talking about like daily or something like that? I think I'm out on Jeff Sims, having rode with my dog for multiple years at this point. I think him and DJU I would bucket in the same bucket in the sense that I think that it's very mental with them, and it's just like it is the yips. I think the two players that like I've heard that for him specifically in the past, and you watch him and it's like, all right, this dude is short arming passes. Like he I can't remember if he got benched in the loss against Northern Illinois a couple of years ago, or if it just they played him and wrote him out and it just kind of played out the way it did. But you hear the descriptions of what he's doing in practice and it's already manifesting, right? Like Casey Thompson was like, all right, this dude, I can't beat this dude out. I'm out of here. I'm like, it's like, all right, we love you, Florida Atlantic, Casey, but like, dude, if you just give it a game or two and let Jeff Sims do the Jeff Sims thing once the lights come on and like see what happens. But I don't know. But at the same time, like that dude is so ridiculously talented with his arm, with his legs. If he ever put it together upstairs, that's top 5, top 10 fantasy quarterback. So it's scary fading him in that regard.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a mix of like what you were talking about, Brandon, with Tagovailoa. Like Tag is going to be all passing, but his like it wouldn't shock me if he threw like 40 touchdowns or 35 plus. Whereas Sims, he's never going to throw 30 touchdowns or come close to it. But what he can bring you on the run is like just really dynamic. And I think Matt Rule is a great college coach.
Yeah.
Which I think he'll know how to take advantage of different, college systems and college coaches, defense, other defenses. So I love the Sims pick. Those are two great like late options. I think are super scary. I mentioned TreVeyon Henderson earlier. I haven't gotten him anywhere. I mean, the guy was a top 5 pick last year, like consensus. I don't have him anywhere, but man, he could legitimately be a top 3 player this year, and it wouldn't shock me. There's a potential world where they run the ball more than years past. They have the players to do it, and a new quarterback. There's a path towards me just getting blown up by teams that have picked TreVeyon, and I just have not landed him once.
So last year when we had like the 3 Ohio State guys that were like at the top of every draft board, I was team TreVeyon. So that was a bad call on my part. Yeah. I mean, that obviously didn't work out. But I was all about it. But, coming into this year, there's a lot of like we found out he actually like broke his foot recently. That report came out. And, you've obviously got Mayan Williams as a veteran guy who's going to demand carries. Dallas Hayden showed he could get carries. They needed running back so bad that the Arizona State guy flipped back to running back. And then I think people forget that Evan Pryor was another very highly touted running back in the same class as TreVeyon. And coming into last year, they were talking about how he was going to be part of the plans, on third down, maybe pass catching back, maybe, kind of a guy they put in. And then he obviously got hurt preseason. So, he should be back and healthy because he was hurt preseason last year. And I feel like he's going to factor in. I think you're right, Chris, that the pie could be bigger for the run game with a new quarterback coming in. But, Marvin Harrison's going to get his. Booker's going to get his. There's just a lot more mouths to feed. So I don't blame you for being a little bit afraid of Henderson.
I assume you live in the Michigan State bubble and don't venture outside of it. So it wouldn't shock me if you haven't seen this. But Ryan Day's basically come out and said that he's seen the light and that he's going to start running his quarterbacks more.
Oh.
You guys still hear me?
Yeah, you're a little in and out, but I don't think either of us have heard about Ryan Day wanting to run quarterbacks more. So we are you have officially caught our interest and our listeners' interest. And we may have lost him for a second.
He's a little frozen. The
Yeah,
internet, baby. Gotta love it.
yeah. Ryan Day shut down his audio immediately.
I think he said, whoa, Kyle McCord, he's not running anywhere, buddy. Settle down.
Is you're good. We've killed the dead air perfectly, like the professionals that we are. Andrew, are you? We need to know more about this immediately. So please do tell.
Yeah. There's not a ton to it. Just the idea that Dave was like, oh, we're gonna start, like, we are gonna run our quarterback now and going forward. It's like, okay, that makes a ton of sense. You just had CJ Stroud for 4 years, who like has clearly proved in the last like six quarters or whatever, or I guess 2 quarters of his collegiate career that he can run the ball. Not that I'm sure it was never in question, but and I get it to some degree why they didn't want to run him. A, you didn't need to. B, you want to save it, not put it on film. But at the same time, now, like, all right, if Kyle McCord's going to be your guy, which I've been trying to acquire Kyle McCord for a couple of years for this moment, so I'm excited for it. But it still seems ridiculous. Like, now you're going to incorporate the quarterback run game into your offense with that dude.
Does that match his play style, or does this give you pause and make you want the who is it, Devin Brown, right? That's the other guy.
He's been hurt. So
yeah, that story just came out today that like he had surgery with his finger or whatever. Right? He's fine. He's good to go. But they're not starting Devin Brown. The way that Brown would ascend, right, is if Cord just falls on his face after at some point into the season or gets hurt. But like the whole idea or the whole thing with McCord and Harrison playing together in high school, having that mind meld, not that Marvin Harrison needs that, like that was enough for me to start thinking about Marvin Harrison Heisman tickets. Just it's like, okay, this guy probably has even another level to his stats. But there's no, I don't think what do you think would have to happen for Kyle McCord not to win that job? He would have to be just like ungodly awful.
I don't know. I mean, he was pretty. That whole thing looked bad in the spring game, right? I mean, they gave a 70-year-old 2-time Heisman winner some carries, so they seemed desperate on offense. But I don't know. Is it likely that the presumed quarterback one for Ohio State continues to be the quarterback one that's really good, that's in Heisman races for the last 20 years? Yeah, but like, I don't know if he's suggesting they want to run the quarterback more. That doesn't feel like McCord's game. And what would we be saying right now if Brown didn't hurt his finger? Like, how close would that battle be? I'm curious. Is it likely that Brown is the starter? Not at all, right? Like heavy lean to McCord, but it another one that wouldn't surprise me if we hear something kind of crazy happen in the fall practice.
Mm-hmm. I have just one more big overarching Big Ten conference question. Is it a boring league for CFF outside of Ohio State? I mean, like, I feel like you don't find like the high flyers in the Big Ten. You know, you might get like a bulk running back or something, but outside of Ohio State, I don't know. I feel like whenever I take Big Ten guys, people like scoff at me, because I'm like taking the ground and pound, classic smash mouth football approach.
I think it's pretty boring, Andrew.
Oh, I think it's getting a little. It still got its roots in some of that boredom, right? But I think that's getting more fun with you coined it, the dairy raid, right, Chris?
No. I can't take that. Somebody responded to Mike Bainbridge's tweet once about the dairy raid, and then I have just kept saying it because I think it's just so clever.
Yeah. Okay. The dairy raid coming to the Big Ten is nice. Iowa, really, I think that we can all agree that they're just going to be an awesome team all the way around this year, especially on offense. I think that's exciting. And then Minnesota is a threat to pick things back up as well. I mean, you can see I'm stretching a little bit. So to answer your question, I guess succinctly, it's one of the more boring conferences. Even some of the ones that I think, from a legacy perspective, I've been enamored with, like the Mountain West. They've pulled back a little bit and gone a little more boring, but they're still, I think, across the board a little more interesting than Big Ten. Big Ten just has so many teams where it's like man, there's nothing there. So
Yeah,
weather does play a factor too, because you can't be chucking it everywhere when the snow's coming down.
Yeah, and you see it when we do the conference only drafts that Jared hosts. Like did you win Big Ten last year?
I won 2 years ago and got second this year.
That's nice.
College football winning edge beat me out by like 20
It's
points.
unfair that he plays in it because like he's I mean that's his day. It's his day to day, right? And he's so into the data and depth charts, which is all that matters. Like not all, because I mean I won like 4 of those things. No, not a brag or anything, but he's tough. But the Big Ten, when you do, so I do all of them. I do all the ones that Jared does, so all 10. And the Big Ten, you find yourself grasping and really ad hoc researching in the moment so much earlier than all the other Power 5 conferences, I think. And I think that speaks to just the lack of offensive viability of a lot of these programs.
Yeah, I think preparing or just thinking about what we would want to talk about for some of these teams, it's kind of comical.
Yeah.
I've got some blanks, but I do have some deep cuts here. I do.
So I legit think we could knock out like 4 teams in like 5 minutes. Like, so my notes for Northwestern, are they more North or more Western?
Mine says blank.
I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, there's literally nothing of any potential there, correct? We can
Is Cam Porter still there?
He is.
Well, maybe him replacing Hull, maybe. We know they like to run the ball, so that's the only potential spot, maybe just based on volume.
That's a good viable call out. I will say it slipped my mind. I actually like that one. Cam Porter is a guy I took a couple of years back pre-injury, which was disappointing to see because he could have had a better, obviously he could have had a better year last year coming back from it. Illinois, they have Luke Altmaier, they have Isaiah Williams, and then they have a kind of a crazy, potentially upside-driven running back room, right? Is there a vibe that you're getting, Brandon, from which running back is number one, McCray or Reggie Love?
I think it's going to be a committee, unfortunately. I've been a Josh McCray fan basically since he burst on the scene as like a true freshman, I think, and then got hurt maybe last year. And then, Reggie Love was getting carries, but I like McCray. I think he's the better running back. I think he's the better fit for what they want to do. I'm not sure if he's bigger, but I have heard from, some people, my friends in Chicago area, that they're looking at more of a committee approach where, last year it was obviously all Chase Brown. So I don't know if we're going to find that one guy to replace him. I think they have a freshman they like too. So I'm expecting more of a committee there.
It's a bulky running back room on our kind of like C2C Slack. Yeah, I think he posted like a screenshot of their running back room, and like everybody is like 240.
Yeah,
so I don't know
large.
what they're feeding him up there. But I don't know if I've ever asked you this, Andrew. Are you an Isaiah Williams fan or no?
I haven't actively sought him out too much, but I like him. He's cool. Nothing really bad to say about him. Catches a bunch of balls, does some cool shit.
I like receivers who used to be quarterbacks, just as a sort of, just as in general. I just think that they obviously know the route trees, so they can sort of, I think, adapt quicker than maybe some other receivers. I think receiver generally, especially in college, is a receiver or a position where guys can come in and be impactful right away. But Isaiah Williams, I swear it's been like 2 years in a row. Illinois has played on like week 0, or they've been in that first game, and Isaiah Williams has like gone off in both games. So he's like the top pickup in all fantasy leagues because he's like the number 1 highest scoring player. And then, 3 games later, he's back to, 3 for 44. So I'm not sure there's much there with Illinois.
He makes it fairly deep in best balls, and I think it's because he doesn't get heavy like yards per reception, and he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. They just don't do enough passing. But if there was some sort of change with Altmaier at quarterback, or maybe whomever behind him that might end up playing type of thing, that where maybe touchdown passes are a thing in Illinois, then I could see Williams become more valuable because they sure do feed him a whole lot.
Yeah, I wonder if Allmeyer takes the offense to another level. You could see it.
I mean, Tommy DeVito did something with him. If Tommy DeVito can do something with him,
Right.
I feel like Altmaier, who's I think we would all agree is a better quarterback, better
Yeah.
athlete.
We thought he was starting there for a while last year. So, I mean, it flipped back. So, Illinois is interesting. I just wonder how they had a good year last year. I just wonder, is there actually going to be sustained success there? I know they have running backs, but overall, I'm not sure it's something that I'm like rushing to try and invest in.
Yeah, and I wonder how much their defense has to be worse, right? They had a bunch of first, second, third rounders essentially all leave. I wonder how much that impacts heavy running back usage and maybe game scripts, like how they want to play that out. But Iowa, I think like Iowa is a one that we can pretty much lock in two positions of interest. One of them is typically elite, and that would be the tight end position. We have a little bit of a narrative street here at the tight end position with Cade McNamara and Eric All being best buddies. They were both at Michigan. I think I'm a big All fan. He's fairly cheap in these drafts. Brandon, is there Luke Lachey was great when he was called upon last year. Do you have a lean on one, or maybe at cost, because Lachey's getting drafted high and All's late? At cost, is there one that you prefer?
All. I've taken Eric All a few spots because of just he's late. I mean, he's like free, and there was a period, I guess, when I was sort of interested in him at Michigan, and then like guys like Colston Loveland and other ones took his spot, but he would be the one just because you don't know which one of these Iowa tight end. Back when we had the Fant Hawkinson situation, I'm like, well, give me whichever one is going to go later. So I think when you have two comparable guys, that just makes sense.
Andrew,
Totally.
is the best friend / roommate narrative valid here with McNamara and All, or do you like Lachey more?
I think it's valid. I think that as opposed to, for instance, the Oregon wide receiver room with Tez Johnson and Bo Nix, I think that's a little ridiculous given how much talent they have a wide receiver at this point.
Like 47 receivers there now. So
right, yeah.
And also too, they both didn't come from Troy. Like Tez was at Troy and Bo's been not his teammate. So I think it's a good.
Yeah, you're right. It's another layer here. Yeah, but All shouldn't have a problem getting on the field, right? They'll run two tight end sets, and then you figure Cade might just have better chemistry with them, so you could see it.
Nate was telling me they had like a ridiculously low amount of scholarship receivers, like in the spring. So they're definitely going two tight ends.
Totally.
There were years where the Iowa running back was just like marquee position. The young guy, I believe, is it Gavin Williams?
Yeah,
There's
he
a bunch of
transferred
Williams
out.
on
Caleb Johnson.
Caleb Johnson, that's what I was thinking of. He seems to be pretty enticing.
I love Caleb Johnson. I love him. I'm big on him. I mean, I know Iowa is a weird offense to be like, yay, I'm all about this guy, but I liked what I saw as a young guy last year. I mean, I guess the question is Iowa's offense going to be, good enough to support a fantasy guy that you're going to feel good putting in there week in and week out? But I thought he showed some burst last year, and we went into last year right thinking like, what was it? There wasn't there two Williamses. We were thinking those guys were going to split it, and then he basically blew them all away very on. So I mean, I like what I see on tape from him, and if he was somewhat productive last year, if he could be like, if the offense could just be a tick better, then I think he would at least have like a worthy flex option.
Yeah, I've been trying to get a piece of Iowa in pretty much every draft I do. Now could be a good time to release. So I've been workshopping this take into fruition for a while, and I think I can release it now. I think that Iowa has a better chance of winning 10 games than Florida State this year.
Oh boy!
Wow, that's spicy.
Thank you.
They both have weak schedules because ACC is not all that strong. But I guess technically Iowa would have to have a weaker schedule, right?
Well, I think Florida State loses to Clemson and LSU, and then there's five games that I don't think they can sleepwalk through. Penn State doing the fucking CBS whiteout game for Iowa is bullshit because that's like, all right, guaranteed L. And then they have one when we went through the schedule a few shows ago. They have one other road game that's really tough too. But outside of that, it's like, okay, they get Illinois at home, they get Minnesota at home. I think they're at Nebraska to end the season. But
State goes there too.
yeah,
So win.
I think that the path to 10 for them isn't that daunting, and I think that it's okay. It's gonna be 8, 9, or 10, and I think that Florida State with two, I think it ends up being 2 pretty guaranteed L's on their resume and 4 or 5 other tricky, challenging games. I think that that's how things net out.
Calling the Iowa bounce back. I like it.
Good.
Let's position this a little bit more towards you, Andrew. Here, Rutgers. What are we doing with Rutgers? Anything? Is this like that GIF of like the stick figure with the poking the stick at? So come on, do something. Is that what we're seeing here with Rutgers offense, or is there something you like?
So I haven't done like a triangulated research of QB RBWR for them. My feelings right now are that, as it has been for the last few years, it's going to be problematic at quarterback. We'll probably see multiple guys coming in. Dude, Johnny Lankin's back for like year 7 or some shit. Did you see that?
I did not, but it does not.
We're giving him QB snaps, and it feels like, I mean, maybe not officially we're ready to turn a page on Gavin Wimsatt yet, but I'm pretty sure I was reading something else about other guys getting touted up. But I mean, Wimsatt's just never looked very good. And then I have no idea what's going on at receiver. But their new OC is like, not that it was a good hire, but for fantasy, it could be good. We took the Minnesota guy, Kirk Soraka, I think his name is, that gave Mo like 60 carries a game, and Samuel Brown, who was like, dude, it's interesting to think about how we would be talking about Samuel Brown if he didn't suffer, I think it was a foot injury in October last year, because he was a true freshman. I think he was a true freshman, and he was ramping up, and he was going to get 20 plus carries a game down the stretch. So we'd be talking about this dude as an absolute battle cow coming into this year. And it took a lot of digging for me to figure out what the injury was. And like, okay, it's a foot injury. I think that they did the thing where they kind of like rested him throughout the spring, but he's going to be good to go. So going in the summer, like, I've taken him a little bit at the end of best balls, and I like, generally speaking, one of my best, like the best ball strategy that I've landed on with running back is I've shot myself in the foot in the past with not taking enough in terms of quantity and just being overly certain about the guys that I've taken up front. Like, oh, I took like 4 running backs in the first 8 rounds. I'm good. And I'll just take like 3 or 4 more. And it never works out that way, right? Dumb shit happens. So I've tried to hold myself to like 9 or 10 running backs. And when I do that, I end up taking like 4 to 5 in like the rounds 20 to 30. And which involves like it's a lot of guys. You're like flipping a coin in a lot of rooms and stuff, or like projecting a lot of things. But I'm fine with that in that range. And Samuel Brown's one of those guys where I consider in the later rounds where it's like, okay, if this, like, he should be RB1 if it breaks right. Like, he looked really good as a freshman. He was gonna come into 20 carries a game if he didn't hurt his foot, and maybe we just take off from there with this dude that fed Mo 50 carries a game at Minnesota last year.
I get behind that. I mean, he did look good. He was young, and it's not like they have anybody else to like steal anything from him. So the opportunity is there.
In the past, we've always found guys to prevent anyone from being viable from a fantasy perspective at Rutgers. But yeah, I think I'm hopeful for sure when it comes to Sam Brown.
All right, one team we have not talked about at all, and I think I could confidently say I have drafted 0 of this team, is Purdue. Besides, I mean, Devin Mockabee is very quality in CFF, right? I think we can all agree. I think there's been more recently some, I don't know, different rumblings that, there's some good confidence towards Mockabee at running back for them, correct? Am I hearing correctly?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like he had the cool fake flea flicker against you guys that we celebrated on here for like a solid 20 minutes.
Yep.
They couldn't quite get him to 1,000 yards when they got slaughtered by like 80 points in the bowl game, even though they tried. But then he got the scholarship. I mean, and while there's been like obviously tons of turnover, both from like in a coaching perspective and from a roster perspective, like he's the constant. You figure that even though the offensive system should skew toward pass, like what else are you going to build out of from an offensive perspective?
They took the defensive coordinator from Illinois and made him their head coach, correct?
Yeah.
What offensively? Who's coaching that team? Who's calling plays? Is it the same guy that's been under Brom?
It's Graham Harrell, right?
I'm asking the question. I clearly have no idea.
I think that's right. Yeah, Graham Harrell.
Yeah.
So I mean, we know he likes to chuck it.
That's in his blood.
Yeah.
Kind of. I feel like the result, I mean, maybe it's just that West Virginia Neil Brown stink that's on him right now, but the results at his last couple stops haven't been overly inspiring, but still, at minimum, things are probably not going to bottom out too bad. You kind of know what you're going to get, at least from a theoretical perspective. They brought in Hudson Card. I'm not really super interested. I've seen him go late in a couple of our best balls. He didn't look too terrible, right, at Texas when he played for Ewers last year. I think that he had some nice plays, but from a fantasy perspective, I don't know. I've fallen for that trap before. Like last year with Harrell's fucking quarterback with JT Daniels, it's like, oh, it's the air raid. He's going to throw for a bunch of yards and he's going to give me a bunch of fantasy points. It's like, even when he had a good game, you're talking about he's scrapping, clawing, trying to get to 20 fantasy points because he's going for negative 20 rushing yards, throwing for 300 yards and 2 scores. And it's like, that's just not going to do it. So it's probably kind of a similar story with Card. I have no idea what's going on with them at receiver. Our boy Brock Thompson hung it up, right? Milton Wright is still in the portal.
Tyron Tracy's now a running back.
Is he?
He's designated as running back. I mean, if you remember him at the end of last season, he really was just playing running back. He would just be like kind of like this weird scat back type of change of pace type, passing type guy.
I'll forever be a fan just because every time he gets the ball, something cool happens. But it's not. It's just not going to aggregate into like a consistent, usable fantasy player. And I burned so much money on this dude in DFS at this point. Every week it's like, oh, 3,800. I love him. Why not? Of course. This will be the week where he goes like 9 for 90 and a score, and now it's like 3 for 18 and no scores.
I need to hear more about what the Purdue offense is going to be. Is it going to be the same thing we saw under Brom? Probably not. It was like this golden goose for passing yards for years. So when teams bring in a defensive coach as the head man, that doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad offense, but it doesn't really like inspire confidence in me that they're going to be like the Purdue that we've seen the last few years. So I'm kind of in a wait and see mode with them.
I would love to see a case study done on the defensive head coach, cool offensive coordinator combination and how that nets out from a production perspective. Maybe it's just like me always remembering all the bad cases, but I feel like it never works out how we would like it to, or a lot of times it fails. But I don't know. Expectations don't feel too high coming in for this year with Maccabee, the dude that kind of got us going on this, being the one guy that's kind of being targeted to any real extent in drafts.
All right. Do you want my Indiana nugget? I got it for you.
I think it's time for the Indiana nugget.
So I like Jalen Lucas. I don't know if you guys know about this guy. He's like a little 5'9" scat bat. Had like an 80-yard touchdown last year. He was returning kicks for them. I don't think he's going to be someone that you're going to draft in regular CFF leagues, but in best balls, Big Ten best balls, he is a big play threat. And I think he could sneak into more carries this year because they've got Josh Henderson, who's just like an older cast off from North Carolina. And they've got Christian Turner, who was basically a cast off from Wake Forest. So those are the only two guys really that I see in front of him. And they're both transfers from other, P5 programs that never really got fair shake. And Lucas is the guy that this staff actually went out and got. I know they're raving about him last year. So I don't know, maybe like late best ball dart throw, because he does have some big play upside. I think he had 3 or 4 touchdowns over 60 yards last year. So he's kind of like my one little my Hoosier dig. That's what I came up with. Jalen Lucas.
I will tell you, you are officially one of us by saying Jalen Lucas is your like little golden nugget. I think that's a great random. I mean, I think we've all maybe heard his name at least once or twice. I certainly know who you're talking about. He's a little bit bigger than I expected. ESPN has him at 5'9", 185.
Right.
And I mean, they used Sean Shivers way too much last year. Now that guy's built like a brick wall, but he's like also 5'6". So like, there's a path towards like me not being surprised by double-digit carries, and they did use him a lot in the passing game. JD made a great point in that podcast I was listening to this morning that PPR, just like in the NFL and college football, is still very valuable to have in a running back. So Lucas would certainly get credit or props for that. There is there. I mean, you have to be excited, Andrew, about. I feel like you would like the quarterback play at Indiana.
I was going to bring it up. Do you think are you a Taven Jackson believer, Brandon?
I honestly I can't get into the Indiana quarterback room enough. I spent too much time on 5'9" running backs. I'll have to look into that.
No, I'll talk about it a little bit. I took a dart throw on Taven Jackson at the end of one of our best balls. I saw some stat that was basically Indiana's pace was insane last year. Like, I don't know. I don't get enough into pace stats to understand if their pace, for instance, was more driven on just being horrific and needing to play catch up all the time, or if like their neutral game script pace was optimal as well. But just if you look at how many plays a game they were running, I'm pretty sure they were super high up there. And Jackson coming over from Tennessee, right? He was, the idea was he was pretty highly rated freshman last year, and I don't follow college basketball at all, but his brother was that dude who's like going like top 5, top 10 in the draft and NBA, right? Jackson Davis or whatever his name is, but I don't know. They're gonna be awful again this year. I think part of his profile is he's got wheels. They're just going to be like the ball. You can dream on the idea that he's just one of those touch machine quarterbacks where he's throwing it 40 to 50 times a game, running it 15 to 20. Maybe it's not efficient, but maybe it looks something kind of like DJ Irons at Akron, where the ball was just in his hands every play, and they were running 80 of them, and he was touching the ball, like he was getting utilized on like 60 to 70 of them. So that's not the worst way to make a quarterback from a fantasy perspective, I think. Now I want to talk Mac, right? Because I want to talk about DJ Irons and how if we just get some more touchdowns, like he is such an amazing. The idea of him is so amazing to dream about in fantasy, but like they were so weird, Akron, and how like he could not score touchdowns last year, even though he was throwing for a bunch of yards, running for a bunch of yards, and like I don't know. But maybe maybe something like that happens with Taven Jackson this year.
Initially, I was like, I don't know, man. Dexter Williams might beat him out, but then I looked at his game log and was reminded that he might be the worst passer in all of college football.
His injury was like, I feel like the reactions at the time were like, this is like the worst thing that ever happened to someone.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a knee, right? And it just did not look great. And I was very bummed because he was like super cheap in DFS, and I had a lot of them.
Yeah,
it didn't keep him from leading a 24-point comeback in Spartan Stadium when he couldn't even throw the ball to cost us bowl eligibility. So the Spartans got beat by a team with bowl eligibility on the line by a team quarterbacked by a guy who can't even throw the ball. So there you go.
That was a unique game in itself.
Let's not talk about it.
Yeah, please. I was gonna say I don't think I want to do that to you, but that was a unique game in itself. So yeah,
Phil Longo. I feel like we got to talk about
Phil Longo. Yes. So I have my opinion on Tanner Mordecai, which is he's just not that good. Like, well, I shouldn't even say that good. He's just not good. And Andrew's got a deeper insight into Tanner Mordecai that I'll let him get into in a second. But Brandon, what is your take on Tanner Mordecai and his CFF potential?
Well, I've been a Mordecai guy. I've taken him in several redrafts, but um, I dropped him when he was the backup for Oklahoma in the Dynasty League. We're all in, not the BTR one, but the other one. I dropped him when I took over that team when he was the backup for Oklahoma, and then he resurfaced at SMU a few years later. So that was my first major gaffe as a CFF player because he obviously turned into a stud. But I've been a fan. I guess I'm just a little bit curious as to how this is going to work at Wisconsin. If we're earlier we were talking about the Big Ten being kind of boring. Wisconsin's definitely one of those boring teams. Well, we know what they have been. Grass, corn-fed meat grinders and a great running back. So is that still what it's going to look like? I don't know. It seems like we're going to have a more dynamic passing offense. It seems like that's the way Wisconsin wants to go under Fickle. I think they're tired of being like the good, not great, sort of boring Big Ten program, and I feel like they want to be considered more in the top echelon of the Big Ten. And I think the way that they need to get there is to recruit better. And so that's what I think that this sort of mentality shift is coming from, because they want to be more trendy and hit with the high flying style of college football. So can it work at Wisconsin? I'm not sure. Braylon Allen, I'm still a believer in. Mordecai, I've been a fan of, but I guess I'm just a little bit skeptical if you can like just completely erase a culture that's been there for like 2 decades.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Where he goes pretty late in drafts. I've taken him in between round 17 and 20. And I think the only risk there is, all right, if the bad games, that there will be bad games against some of these tough defenses, right? If what that results in is him losing his job, then I think that obviously that doesn't return value. Otherwise, I think that they'll get the things figured out offensively to the point where he could at least have boom weeks against some of the lesser conference teams and in the non-conference as well, to justify where he's going in drafts. I'm not putting too much stock into spring game and where he threw a bunch of picks or whatever. Like, I don't know. I just don't.
Are you willing to invest in Wisconsin receivers like Chimere Adike?
Yeah, so I have a little bit. I've taken some CJ Williams, and I'm willing to kind of just throw some darts and take some shots. They're all so cheap that where it's like, okay, like I'll Williams has been the one where I think the only one I've taken multiple times in drafts at this point. He feels inevitable to some degree, just from an ascension perspective. And you can pretty much just name your price. And maybe that's even like a safer path than Mordecai to some degree, just in the sense that Mordecai, he's gonna struggle, and maybe he's gonna struggle against some of the tougher opponents, maybe to the point where benching ends up occurring. But just from Longo's systems, we know that the WR1, WR2, there's going to be receivers that are going to do well in the system.
Yeah, it's certainly a beneficial guy to land. It's just, I think there's a lot of names out there between all of them. Yeah. DK and CJ Williams and Will Pauling.
Skylar Bell's still there, isn't he?
Skylar Bell, yeah. So there's a bunch of options, and I think there's a lot of. It's just gotten super dark outside here. If you're watching the video here, I'm outside, and it's like literally just gotten insanely dark here. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of options. I have randomly taken one at the end of a draft of a best ball because all of them will be used to some extent. If you can just try to find one that might blow up, it can't hurt to try it once or twice. But yeah, the whole Mordecai thing, not to beat a dead horse, there's just gonna be a lot of tough competition. The weather's gonna get sketchy, and as much as I do believe this will be like a true or close to true Phil Longo system, I think like Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi are both very, very capable to very good running backs that they're gonna want to feed because they've shown to win games by doing that. So I think there's a certain level of that will continue. Running backs, one room that's typically been a great running back room for us, and we'll kind of wrap up here shortly. We'll try to speed through this, but Minnesota, Mo Ibrahim's gone. We mentioned that. His 100 carries a game, even coming off a torn Achilles. Is there is this a running back by committee, Brandon, or is there Sean Tyler, or is it a different guy that you're leaning on?
Detroit Lion, Mo Ibrahim, I might say. Sean Tyler is what I'm hearing from the beat reporters. I mean, they went out and got him. I mean, obviously he has the connection to Western Michigan that with PJ Fleck there. I think they brought in like 3 or 4 Western Michigan transfers, actually. There's one at receiver too, Corey Crooms. So I think Sean Tyler is the number one. The beat reporters, I was listening to Bud Elliott's summer school series.
Same.
I don't know if you guys listen to those. Pretty clutch, actually, for a little bit of fantasy nuggets. And that their beat reporter seemed pretty set in his ways that Sean Tyler was brought in to be the number one, as kind of that big play threat to replace Mo Ibrahim. And I think Zach Evans is a guy I know a lot of people like, so I'm sure he'll be involved. We've seen multiple running backs be involved, but I as a Sean Tyler manager in a few dynasty leagues, I'm hoping that ends up being the case because I've always liked his talent.
Is he too small though? Or, I mean, he ran a pretty decent bit at Western Michigan, but is he too small, or do you think he'll be fine?
What's he listed at? 5'8", 185. Yeah, it's hard to say in the Big Ten.
He makes Jalen Lucas look pretty good.
Yeah. I guess it might be hard to say, 209 carries last year. That's in the MAC though. So how did he do against, let me see. I'm just trying to look how he did against Michigan State in the 13 for 68 and a touchdown against Michigan State in the season opener. So maybe if you just want a brief look at, what he might look like in the Big Ten, if he's going to make enough plays and he is active in the passing game, then I think he'll have enough value to, again, be flex worthy, or maybe more than that. I guess I'm putting my eggs in his basket. I mean, I think Zach Evans will be involved though.
But I think they'll run it enough where
right.
Evans can be involved and it's still fine.
Who's this quarterback? The Greek, they call him the Greek something. Yeah.
Alton Kalamikis or something like that. I don't know. He doesn't seem like a guy that can hit what do they call that? What do they say? A broadside of the barn or something like that, right? Like, I don't think he can't hit the ocean from the boat type of thing. I don't know. Andrew, are you a believer in him at all?
Not really. So I've been trying to listen to all the summer school podcasts as well. I enjoy them for a few different reasons. One of which, like, what else? There's not that much else to listen to. While I try and track down a lot of like digital print type stuff on schools, like it's great that when you could just throw on some audio and have it come to you for a lot of these schools, some of which are like trickier to track down information on. It is tough, even though Bud Elliott is trying to ask very pointed, direct questions and sift through the BS to some degree, even though I'm sure he wouldn't phrase that way since he works with these people. That they're like a lot. There's a ton of fluff. It's really difficult for these people to say anything disparaging about the programs a lot of times, which is what you want to hear. You want to hear like the true strengths and negatives. And a lot, like, you listen to some of these, a lot of them, and it's like, did you listen to the Arizona one?
Yeah.
That Bud pointed out, like, they were 126th in defense or something last year, and they like half the program transferred out on the defensive side. And he's like, so you think they're going to be better and worse? He's like, well, they're going to be better because they got a lot of transfers in too. It's like, okay, great. So like, okay, you're not going to actually say anything actually meaningful and negative, even when it's justified about the program. And a lot of them are like that. The other thing that
step up that wide receiver proceeds to name every single wide receiver.
Right. That's the other thing I was going to say. It's like there a lot of the responses to questions that we're looking for. Right. It's like, okay, like, especially when you're talking about programs that, there's like generally a money position within that program that's going to pay off from a fantasy perspective. I just want to hear who's going to play that role. And you usually get like 2 to 3 to 4 names. It's like, okay, that's not fucking helpful.
Well, we know that Chris Ottman-Bell, who has stats back to 2018 on ESPN, is probably their number one receiver. But I actually think the tight end, Span Ford, has a little bit of sleeper upside. He was big for me in the Big Ten best ball last year. And, tight end is such a scarce position. Anybody that is like the tight end on a team that is lacking targets, I'm kind of interested in. So I feel like he could maybe have some touchdown upside.
I want to believe in the transfer receivers because they were like Elijah Spencer was awesome at Charlotte, and I have him in Dynasty League. Drafted a little bit of him last year too, but like it feels tough to go from Charlotte to Minnesota. That wide receiver room is pretty. I think it's pretty fun, and part of the idea with Minnesota, right, is that this year they are potentially shifting away from the run more to the pass. So with coordinator change and stuff like that, getting back to prior years, Primo Flack. Who knows if it's true, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't drafted Spanford largely out of ignorance. You could see it, right? You could see how it could pay dividends.
Somebody's got to catch passes.
Right.
Somebody has to. So.
And I think there is a vibe that they will pass more. Like it feels like, and it does kind of line up with their skill room, right? Their running backs aren't as fun or appealing looking as the receiver group that we just discussed being good names, Altman Bell, Spencer, etc. Spanford, I think Spanford for sure. You make a great point. You're a starting tight end that's like an actual name that's been said out loud by people. You already have a leg up. And then, maybe the targets around him aren't the most exciting. Then you get in there. But I think his is more like talent, and we've seen some past success rather than completely bare room. So
right. 42 catches for 500 yards. He was their leading receiver last year. So
it's pretty big. That's a pretty big tight end number. Tight end gets real weird real quick. But yeah, I think we knocked out pretty much every single team. I think the last one would be Maryland, but we touched on them. It's a little bit lengthy on the show. I think we wrap it up.
Yeah,
Brandon, appreciate you hopping on and being our guinea pig. You obviously do work on your own, right? You said you have a Michigan State podcast. Do you want to maybe pitch a little bit about where that people can find your Michigan State takes as podcast, as well as be ready for those heated moments when Michigan State or college football does something crazy?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Brandon the Champ. That's spelled with an A. Unfortunately, some guy in Nebraska who has like 12 tweets and he hasn't tweeted since 2009 has Brandon the Champ. So I keep tweeting at him to delete it. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist in the day job, a big J journalist, as they like to call us. But yeah, I cover a lot of different things, including sports, but I host our Michigan State podcast called Spartan Confidential. It's with our beat reporters for the college, the guys who cover the basketball team and the football team. So it's very, very comprehensive, but very much Michigan State focused. So if you're a Big Ten fan, you might find it interesting, but it's definitely geared towards the diehards of the green and white. So I get to go on there and be a fanboy with the two, serious reporters. So
do you guys nice. Have you ever ventured into the CFF world on that show, or do you always keep it like? Has there ever been a breakdown of like CFF potential by skill players, or is that not a thing?
Nah, I wish, man. I would love to do that. I mean, I'm glad you guys invited me because I've been definitely chomping at the bit to talk a little more CFF. I mean, I was, like I said off the top, I would consider myself still kind of a novice, but I get to play with some pretty good players like yourself and others I listen to. So I would love to talk more, but yeah, we keep it mostly on the field. I mean, recruiting. We'll talk about some culture stuff every once in a while, but we focus on basketball just as much as football on that show because, well, it's Michigan State.
Yeah,
so it makes sense.
Do you still pod about movies?
I do. Yeah, I have a movie podcast called Second Day Film Podcast, but that's more just for fun, little side thing that I do on the side. So,
have you watched New Guardians yet or no?
I have not. I was soon. I hadn't seen Ant-Man, so I was waiting for that to come out on Disney Plus. So I just finished that. Yeah.
I'm so far behind on all Marvel stuff, but my daughter wanted to go see New Guardians, so we went this weekend.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. I think I might cry. I don't know.
Oh, dude, but... yeah. Multiple times, bro. Multiple times. But it like, I don't know how you felt about 1 versus 2, but this was a lot closer to Guardians 1 than 2. Like, it's awesome.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me, man. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. It was a good time. I mean, you've been playing a long time. You're relevant in the space for sure. All of us CFFers that have been around forever certainly know the name and won't be hitting follow for sure by the time this is over. We're already following. Already following is what I mean.
Oh, I got you. I got you. I'm like, I know we got a Michigan State going on here thing, but it's okay, man.
They've already hit it, so they don't have to do it again. Is my point. But
gotcha.
anyways, hope everybody enjoyed the show. And I don't know what conference we're going to do next, but we've basically lined up somebody for every single conference to chat with. A lot of familiar names, maybe one or two that you do have to hit the follow button on. And then, but yeah, we'll enjoy it. Hope everybody enjoys it and have a great rest of your week. Thanks, guys.